Need to go live. All righty. All right, everybody. It should be queuing up on all the channels right now, LinkedIn and YouTube, coming to you live. Another great episode of This Week in Drones, Thursdays, 1 p.m. Eastern. And I have the privilege of being joined here by our number one flight crew member, Andrew Bowen. How are you doing today, Andrew?
I can't complain. What a wonderful day in Southern California.
Absolutely, and I'm jealous. Look at that. It looks beautiful out there. I know you got some planes flying overhead, and we're going to get into aviation. We're going to get into obviously drones. We're talking this weekend drones, right? We're going to talk about California, Los Angeles, other areas of the state that are going to have the World Cup coming, and then the Olympics, right? And I think 2028 World Cup, 2026 Olympics 2 years later. So you guys have a lot coming your way, and we're going to talk about, how drones can be used for surveillance, for security, and then how, we can kind of wrap our heads around securing these events from the threat of drones. And there's a lot of elements that go into that you and I were just talking about backstage that I'd love to get into here in a minute, regarding, common operating picture. We're talking things like TAC to bring all of the awareness together into one place. We're talking about communications backhaul for everyone to be able to, have the comms real time to be able to communicate together. And some of your background is pretty crazy with climbing towers for, different comms, big cell towers and things. And we can kind of chat a little bit about your background as well. But I just kind of want to give people a quick heads up before we're going with the conversation. And don't forget, if you're here while we're live on Thursday, send in your comments and your questions, particularly related to, protecting the World Cup coming and the Olympics. And the World Cup is coming to a whole handful of cities, right? I mean, we're talking, I'll pull this up just for a second for awareness for everybody, but we're talking Vancouver, Seattle, San Francisco Bay, Los Angeles, where Andrew is coming out of Pasadena, right near there. And then, whole slew of others as you look down this list, east, central, west here in the US. And it's exciting. It's awesome. I think it's next summer coming up. But man, we've spent a lot of time on the podcast talking about enabling drones over the last couple months as Part 108 was coming out, right? The notice of proposed rulemaking, the draft, it hit. We've been talking a lot. We've been having different people on here to talk about what can drones do for delivery, and how can we automate massive fleets of drones for Amazon or Walmart. What does that even look like? But now it's like feet on the ground. We're anchoring back to saying, okay, we need to just make sure these Part 107 pilots who are flying their drones have a clue what the rules are. And it's going to become very interesting as these massive events come to these major cities, when you have a whole mix of people out there that own drones, some of them following the rules, some of them not following the rules. How do we begin to think about security? And we'll be talking about this over the next, few months, really, on the channel. But I wanted to kick it off with my good friend Andrew, and I'll pass it here in a second to you, Andrew. But yeah, thanks for being a flight crew member. Love the hat; looks great on you. I'm glad it got to you. And I thought it would be really interesting to share, just first of all, a little bit about your background. You were telling me something wild about like your work as a contractor in Iraq and Afghanistan, with people getting like electrocuted in the shower or something like that, and they had to solve for that after they came off the battlefield. They called you, flew you out. Just take us into that world a little bit, and then we'll kind of go into drones and TAC and all the other things. But take it away.
All right. Well, thank you for your time, David. Your podcast is one of the best, and thanks for the hat because I wear it proudly. Um, we all need to come to an understanding. I started off as a recreational pilot. I went ahead and failed my first chance at my Part 107. That was not, it's almost a ground school if you wanted to be a Cessna pilot. But, a second try, I made it around. So I did get my Part 107, and I do take flying drones very seriously. I do look up my resources on the internet to find out where I should and should not be flying. And I don't think people take that kind of time when it's just kind of fun and, my 14-year-old kid is out flying his drone. Well, during the wildfires here in California, we had a recreational pilot fly a drone into a super scooper that was making a drop, and of course it was low altitude, and they probably didn't see each other until it was too late. And there's just been a lot of drone incursions that I believe technology is capable, and especially when I go to TAC, because I'm a big TAC fan, I do believe TAC is the way. I've seen a lot of fire departments and a lot of public safety really trying to reach out to, the open source TAC environment that is available, and jurisdictions trying to um, correspond with each other. We can go as far as the communication systems, how, you know, we have all these interagency communication systems, and that's when you're getting into just the comm level and the radios and, a CHP or, the local fire department are they all going to figure this out? And we got some big events coming, and it's going to be interesting to see if how much drone usage will be used or utilized.
Exactly. That's great. Well, I kind of teased to the background on the Iraq and Afghanistan piece, so I definitely want you to touch on that. But then I want to jump back to Corona, the incident that happened there, but then some of the really cool stuff that the fire department is doing with drones on their fire engines. But well, I'll leave that one for a second. Tell us for a minute, just since I brought it up. What were you doing in Afghanistan and Iraq, and why did they call you out there? Just a little blip on that for people listening. Get to know you a little bit.
So I've been an electrician since I graduated high school in 1999. I became a certified electrician in early 2000s. California was an early adopter of learning the NFPA code and actually taking the test. It was not an easy test, but it was a worthwhile test. So I became a master electrician. And then I actually, to tell you the truth, it's really a funny story. I found this job offering on um, a LinkedIn or something like that. And it was just, if you're a licensed electrician in any state, would you like to come over and work for the Army Corps of Engineers? And at that point in my life, I was ready to do that. I was single, no kids, no nothing baggage wise. And I I went, and in 2013, I started, I got over there overseas with a small company, and then I was handpicked out of a group of electricians for the Army Corps of Engineers. And what was happening back then is the our warriors were coming off the battlefield, in the electrical situation within the camps and the fobs and all the different areas were being maintained and being built by uneducated foreign nationals. So the Army Corps of Engineers decided, once they had hit an aspect of how many um, soldiers were actually getting electrocuted in the showers, it became a big problem. So it became a grounding and bonding problem. So I actually specialize in grounding and bonding. And I can tell you that there is probably almost $1 million worth of copper electrodes driven into a sand that is not going to reach Earth and it's not going to do anything. But that was their solution at the time. So I came in there with a specialty understanding of how to mitigate the problem. So I was involved in life, health, safety issues, and it just became overwhelming with the paperwork. And then I ended up moving to the Department of State, and I went to embassies all over the world, all obviously doing grounding and bonding. So lightning protection. I was one of the first people to get a UL certification for lightning and bonding. And then I took that through the State Department. And then one day I got called up and they asked me to go to Virginia or Williamsburg, Virginia. So I got to go see the farm and I got to go play at the farm for quite a few years. So I've got quite a weird experience as a civilian contractor. I wear this uniform, but it's actually my father's jacket because he was in World War II. So I wear this jacket, but it's not mine. I never wore the uniform. I was a civilian the entire time. However, I did serve my country in the only way possible. And going past that, what I learned, I got to go, one of my favorite people to go visit and hang out with were all the drone pilots in Afghanistan. So I'm sure you've seen the pictures of me standing next to a MQ Reaper and all the cool drones. And then I used to make sure that all those pilots that were put in those containers were really cool. Um, they they would pass off the drone as soon as they took off and landed. They would drop that to either the CIA or whatever department was taking over the drone. But that I used to go hang out with the drone guys, so that's why I got such a fascination with drones, and that's where I'm at now. And now I'm a part of your drone pilot
Ecosystem, right?
TWD. Yeah.
I love it, man. Well, that's such a cool background. It makes me understand better your mindset too for the things we've talked about. The reason you're even on here to talk about how, like, the connection points. I almost think of drones as like those lightning strikes, and you're trying to figure out how to ground them in the sense of like, how do we actually manage this whole everything that's coming in from the sky across, again, the World Cup coming up, the Olympics coming up, and then you even anchor it to the point about Corona, the city, right, and the issue with the drone running into the super scooper recently with the fires. But then I just want to get into like kind of feet on the ground, practically speaking. Your buddy AJ over there, tell me a little bit about what he's done now to actually leverage drones, because I think we heard about the negative story in Corona of how drones can be used inappropriately and cause an accident, but then tell me about how they're actually being leveraged for good in the fire department. And I just want people out there to think about some of these. I want to apply some of these lessons learned to LA as these events come up, right? And like, what are the practical ways of leveraging drones for good, for security, but also, we'll get more in a minute. Well, in a bit, second half, we can get more into like counter drone. How do we detect them? How do we track them? What do we do about them? But take us into your understanding of Corona. I think that's nearby, right? You can drive over to them. So that happened kind of in your backyard, the whole incident. But then,
Yeah.
tell me about what you kind of recently saw there.
The Corona Fire Department had nothing to do with the incursion. That happened actually up in Pasadena with a recreational pilot. But AJ, being one of the spearheads of TAC, and he is like the godfather of TAC, he's used that leverage. So the incursion had nothing to do with his fire department or even in his jurisdiction. What he's done is taken his knowledge and abilities and flight skills as a drone pilot, and he's built a program within the Corona Fire Department to now have leveraged the ability to use government funding, government money, to go ahead and give the ability to have each one of their apparatuses to have not only a drone pilot, Part 107, somebody capable, but actually have something like a matrice or something nice attached to the apparatus. So
To the fire engine, you're saying?
to
Each
the fire
going
engine.
out.
So
Okay,
he
gotcha.
has spearheaded an ability for his particular jurisdiction to use the latest technology. They spearheaded with TAC. They've spearheaded with having a drone on the apparatus with a competent pilot available. But let's not separate. Let's leave him out of the incursion that happened during the wildfires, because that had nothing to do with any of that. That was some young kid in Pasadena or Altadena during the fire that took down the super scooper.
All right. They were just like careless, clueless. That person.
Yep.
I think they were like a professor or a PhD student or something, and they were just trying to
Something.
get footage of the fire and all this. Yeah, it's
You
kind of
know what?
crazy, but
There's
yep.
so much disinformation. You really even
Mm,
at this point, I've tried to research what actually happened, and nobody wants to talk about it.
yeah, totally. All right, so look, moving from there, because I think that was pretty interesting, right in your backyard. Shout out to AJ and Zeb Nadler and some of my buddies that run together as well. They've got a podcast and they
Yep.
talk, all things
Zev's
tech.
awesome. Yep.
So I think that's an important foundation. I'm sure we'll get into that in future episodes as well, just how the common operating picture is so important. We need to have a clue what's going on across the board when it comes to drone detection, the equipment, the policies, procedures that need to roll out at these cities for protecting large events. I'm curious what you've seen of that. I've been able to be part of some really cool recent like workshops where it's very hands-on. We're walking facilities that are going to be housing World Cup events and practices and things that need to have drone detection equipped, right? So like my day job with Echodyne radars, I'm coming out with that mindset, walking these sites, thinking about angles and different placements for mobile radar systems so that we can detect and track. But there's a lot of layers that go into it, right? These are complex environments. We're talking, all sorts of buildings, facilities, trees, different roadways in and out, different potential exit, escape points if someone were to try to do something nefarious and try to drive out of there. And we're having to kind of map this whole scenario along with collaborating between the city and state and county and like the maybe a university if it's at their event or at their stadium, and everyone has to talk together, work together, link all this information together, right? But do you have any experiences, thoughts on just beginning to crack the code on how do we get ahead of the threat of people, whether they're careless, clueless, or whether they're really truly nefarious? How do we get ahead of that threat of them utilizing a drone to wreak havoc, to cause a whatever chaos or drop something on a crowd, etc.? Go for it if you have any thoughts.
Well, I definitely believe that the technology that you're working on is the low-level radar. We need to do under 500-foot radar, and most radar is not, anything FAA commercialized. They're not looking anything below 500 feet. So this is where we strategically set up these systems that you're probably more involved in than I am. But, and then are we going to use ADSB as our backhaul system? Are we going to be able to put 400 feet lower elevation? I mean, how far can we look with some of this radar? If I put it on a nice high standing building and I'm pointing it at a nice jurisdiction of, maybe 60 feet to 150 feet, and I honestly will throw that back into your corner. Where is the small radar packages available? And then are we going to mandate that we get these drones that are bought off the shelf? I don't see anybody tagging their drones. I mean, I registered my drone and I have a nice little serial number on a QR, or, just on my drone. If somebody finds my drone in their backyard, at least they'll be able to track who owned it. But I don't think people are doing that, and I don't think it's being pushed very highly. But if we're talking about protecting a small event or even these big events, um, I'm looking at the digital twin system. That's something I'm very involved in, is building digital twins where we already know what the building looks like from a three-dimensional objective environment. And then how do we figure out where our radar system is looking at this? And, during that 2-day drone thing that happened not too long ago, we saw some really interesting technology. There's a company called Reveal out there that not only uses the acoustic technology for, finding gunshots, but, the drone puts off a very high signature um, acoustical noise that can be picked up in a whole different understanding of the geospatial information.
Well, let me
So,
jump in. I mean, I think there's a lot of layers I think that are essential to drone detection. You mentioned acoustics being one of them, right? Of course, radars being that foundational layer that I mentioned earlier. These are pretty noisy environments. They're pretty loud. When it comes to acoustics, there's a real challenge in that, right? Putting because the acoustic sensors are going to typically be drowned out quite a bit by crowd noises and car noises. Coming in like the closer you get to a stadium, the more complex the environment is. Now, the same could be said of radar if you were to take it, like, let's say, I was next to a stadium recently that we were covering, and there was a really tall building right next to it. We stood on top, looked down. It was great vantage point, man, for a camera. But you have to think about, if you're pointing anything directly into a crowd, it's going to be incredibly noisy. There's a lot of movement, there's a lot of activity, a lot to differentiate for any system, and same for acoustics. But then, radars, we determined to be on top of that roof and aim a radar straight down into the stadium was not very effective. You really have to start thinking kind of granular here as you're laying this stuff out. Whereas right, either on the edges of the stadium itself, or there were some buildings adjacent that weren't so tall that were almost like parallel to the height of the stadium itself. We can mix and match, kind of map out these, our radars that are not, they're not spinning around, they're directional. So you can point one here, one there, and map it around to get true coverage, and yet do it more so from like horizon and up, as much as possible. Or if you're kind of looking on the edge of the stadium, looking out and like below horizon and then up into the airspace. That way, you're kind of seeing low flying drones too. But it took being on site and really, almost like you think about digital twins. I like the way you could do this virtually if you had a digital twin of the environment, for sure. But like I was with the local PD there, the state police as well. We walked the site. There was Part 107 pilots. They actually flew some of the paths they thought a bad actor might attempt, and then we were like, well, hey, if you fly right down there, you sneak through this little area, it'd be hard to pick you up on this radar. So let's point one coming the other way. It was pretty cool. We really drilled it down. And then it, then it took thinking about other layers too. Hey, if maybe there's a gap over here with radar in this one segment, that could be an issue. Well, they thought about layering officers over there, shutting down that little segment of road, and there was like a choke point of a road that would probably be the likely exit point. It's like right to the highway, and they could zip away. And so they're like, well, let's have some officers there, and maybe we shut down that road for the game, or anyways, it was pretty interesting. You really have to kind of mix and match these in a good way, but you need to have a system that's flexible, that's software defined, that you can actually do the tuning and tweaking to be in these really kind of complex urban, typically noisier environments, whether you're using radars, cameras, acoustics, or also, remote ID is obviously becoming much more commoditized now and readily available for those who actually, choose to transmit, right, and actually choose to go on and register their drone. Of course, any of these sophisticated actors are not going to be transmitting remote ID at the end of the day, right? I mean, we see that happening at prisons that we work with, where
Well, there's the big caveat is a lot of that technology is coming out of the war that's overseas with these drones that are tethered by, you know, optical cables. And then, how are you going to stop that really low level drone? But what I'm seeing in my own perspective is not only do we have the Rose Parade, the Rose Bowl, we have FIFA coming, we have the Olympics. I think we should be scaling our technology based on all these little events leading up to one big, huge event that's going to be televised worldwide. And if there's a mistake at the Olympics, we're going to be responsible for what we did not do.
for sure, I think that's a great way to put it. It's just we can stair step, we can add layers, get funding, grant funding, whatever the case, for each of these events as they level up in, how many eyeballs are going to be on them. And I would think there's going to be funding outside of, I forgot to mention, but I believe it's like 500 million set aside within the one big beautiful bill that's going to be able to be allocated for drone security for FIFA, for the World Cup events for these major cities, including LA, right? And the others, right? Houston and Dallas and Atlanta and Miami and Toronto, and like, just like, well, of course, Toronto being in Canada, but yeah, anyway, there's funding set aside just for that, and we got to take advantage of that and be prepared for it, though, and be thoughtful. The way I was describing, being on site recently, and how we had to map out the layout and do it strategically. We couldn't just look at a map and go, hey, there's a tall building, drop some radars on it. When you're actually on site, you're looking in the real world. You got to start like tuning and vetting these things in a way that makes sense, right? Too many people do nothing, get money, and then just go wild and go grab something last second and don't
Exactly.
realize it's not going to work for their environment. That happens way too often, and we try to really get ahead of
And
that.
and you and I both know that there's a handful of vendors that are actually in the space and really trying to put the real technology on the ground. But there's also a lot of people that are just trying to sell you whatever you're willing to buy.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. So that's good, man. Well, any other thoughts or advice, just as things come together in your backyard? In that LA area, Pasadena. But obviously you're right outside of LA. A lot of eyeballs that are going to be on that area with the Rose Bowl, with the World Cup, with the Olympics, each kind of staggering coming like obviously we'll stay in touch. We'll stay in touch with folks like AJ and what he's doing. Like everyone kind of plays a different role, right? When I talk about
Yep.
sensors, when I talk about radars, remote ID, acoustics, cameras, all that needs to flow up. Ultimately, I think I agree that like something like TAC, where there's I mean, each agency can have their own, whatever proprietary system they want to use that's really fancy and works well. But when it comes to collaborating on these huge events, you might have, I mean, I have no idea how many agencies are going to have to collaborate. It's probably a huge list when you throw in federal agencies on top of state, local, county. Who knows? Maybe 20 agencies. I don't know. 5,
Yes.
10, 15,
Yep.
20 agencies need to collaborate and bring the equipment that each of them have to the table. How are we going to deconflict all that and see that all in one place and communicate all of that in a coherent way? And I think, certainly think you guys are cracking some of the code on that interface and communication side.
Well, the interesting part is the interoperability of their communication system has gotten a lot better here in Los Angeles. They really spent quite the only people that are not participating in the interoperability is the LA County Sheriff. I mean, you can hear everybody. Most of it's encrypted, but it's all available and it's all flowing on the same backbone network of communications level. The the camera systems aren't quite as far as what Europeans are doing, where there's a central hub of all the cameras, but most of them are tied to the local agencies, so they're sharing them. I guess when it comes to the aviation, uh, they're they're pretty on top of it. We got LAX, Burbank, um, some of the smaller little jurisdictional airports. Everybody seems to be communicating, I think, from my perspective. But also, when it comes down to big events, they try to segregate it out of what they already have that's built. So that's kind of interesting from my perspective. So
In
I
other
don't
words,
know.
they may fund a totally separate system to
Yeah,
support that major
yes,
event because someone's in charge and they need to make a name for themselves and they need to go out and find their own, even if something is
exactly.
working in the area, but
Yeah,
they might need to go, and that's why anything that comes to play should be interoperable. I like that word. Michelle Duquette would love to hear you saying that word on the podcast because that's she couldn't make it today, by the way, folks, but she'll be on next week for sure. But I totally agree. The sensors themselves, whether radar, etc., it needs to be interoperable and not just proprietary and only works with one system. And then all the systems ultimately need to be able to at least feed, validated tracks or alerts up into some sort of central management platform, and then we can actually make the system work together and hopefully not invest $500 million into one-time use drone detection systems, but just
and
invest in more of
that's
the same of what's working today, right?
and that's the great part. We can use TAC and the interoperability of just the TAC ecosystem has allowed us. I can look at freeway cams. I can look at all of the little pinpoints that come from, CHP or where there's a shutdown. I mean, we have this ability, but we're not sharing.
Yeah, that's a good point, man. Yeah, and so I mean, collaboration is key. We're going to be part of quite a few of these events, trying to bring together multiple stakeholders so that there is more interagency sharing and conversation. So we'll be in touch with, obviously listeners of the pod, but I mean, you and I and the people we know. Let's stay in touch around that because there's a lot of demand right now. A lot of people asking and requiring more training coming up to next summer for the World Cup coming to their area. There's quite a few different sorts of trainings, and some are really simple and just an afternoon, an hour or two. Some were part of, or like a 5 day full hands-on workshop training, full fledged. But anyways, glad to be part of that. If anyone out there listening, wants to be part of a training like that or wants to help, enable or provide information at a training, or if you're in a city that is going to be hosting the World Cup coming up, right? Like I mentioned a few already, but also New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia. We're talking uh, all over the place. Seattle, um, San Francisco, as well as LA. So, I mean, if you're in one of these major cities and you're a law enforcement agency, or you play some role in this whole ecosystem in protecting these facilities from drones, these events, then definitely reach out, and I think we'll have more podcasts, obviously, but again, we have some really powerful hands-on training that at least we're associated with and that we can help bring to the table. So, I don't know if you've seen that as well, Andrew, but to your point, we need everyone to be talking and on the same page and collaborating with what they have, and we're helping enable that as much as we can. But any
Well,
final thoughts on that?
this might walk off of the drone situation for a second, but the Gaussian splat, that is something very new. It's actually really hard to understand because a lot of people don't understand what a Gaussian splat is. They're making some new cameras with the ability to do the LiDAR. I don't know if they're attaching to the drones quite yet, but they're handheld. The Gaussian split is the digital twin, or how you're going to make the digital twin. They're trying to figure out why the file sizes can get shrunk a little bit better. But that's what I've been looking at, is the Gaussian splat. And then what you do with that is you turn it into the digital twin. And then now I'm working with somebody that's involved in virtual reality. So I've gone as far as, I can take a Gaussian splat of a fire truck or a excavator for cat, and I can walk in there with AI, and you can sit there as if you've never driven this thing before, and each button will tell you what it's supposed to do. I just throwing out that technology. It's free for use. The Gaussian splat. It's a
That's
really
cool.
interesting thing.
Well, question on that. I mean, couldn't you leverage that could you actually get like a digital twin of a small area of an urban area around
How about
a
the how about the
event?
entire facility?
Exactly, like the facility itself, the surrounding buildings, the surrounding
Yep.
streets, and then like run
Every
digital.
egg, every exit, every
Exactly.
AED device, every um e- a fire extinguisher, every bathroom, everything. The actual digital twin, and then walk through it in VR.
So what I'm thinking though is like take a stadium, get that, and then get the
The whole
surrounding
thing.
buildings and roads, and
Yep.
then you could do some of these, like you could do a virtual, not only like a virtual analysis or, a vulnerability assessment, but you could like almost run war games, so to speak, a red team, right?
And then
About
wouldn't
like,
wouldn't you throw
yeah,
that right in? What wouldn't you throw that information right into TAC, and you could start pointing people and all the little skittles into the right direction,
that's
knowing
cool.
exactly which floor and where the AED and where every single thing is. I'm
Yeah,
right
that's cool.
there, dude. Right there.
That's cool, man. Well, Andrew, I appreciate your time, man. Thanks for kicking off as well, like this sort of shift of topics from looking at. We've looked a lot at Part 108 on the podcast and enabling drones, as I started the podcast talking about. But for those who join more recently, who are tapping in here, I mean, we've been talking for weeks about the FAA's new rulemaking, proposed rulemaking, to enable way more drones to fly for in mass, right, all across the skies, and it's going to be this whole futuristic view. But now, as more and more conversation is shifting towards how are we going to protect these major cities that are going to be hosting the World Cup, and of course, right there where you're based in the LA area, with not only the Rose Bowl World Cup, but then also the Olympics coming in a couple of years. how do we begin to bring the right stakeholders together, bring the right technologies and detection systems, and start to get them deployed and start to get, to where we're working together and looking at a common operating picture. Let's keep down that path, right? And I'll definitely cue you in if we're gonna, for the trainings that we're gonna be part of in that area, whether it's Seattle or LA, and
Well,
vice versa.
one other question I wanted to ask you is about these massive drone displays that are taking over fireworks. What do you think about that?
I've never gotten to see one in person, but it's interesting. You definitely see some odd, interesting videos floating around of some of them falling out of the sky, and I'm not per se an expert on that side, as much as I am on the detection, ground-based detecting the void on the radar piece of that puzzle. But it's certainly eye-opening to see what's possible on a commercial level, right? I mean, if someone were to utilize that for nefarious purposes, it's pretty capable already in terms of swarming and sending an entire fleet to do something nefarious. That only kind of highlights further the fact that we're quite behind the curve as a nation, I think, regarding how drones could be utilized for nefarious purposes. Not that I wish that they were, and hopefully it's 100 years before we ever see any kind of funky, situation happen. Right? Nobody wants or wishes for that, but I think we would be unwise, to kind of just put our head in the sand and just simply say, well, there's no statistics really. There's very few statistics on drones being used to do some sort of, big attack or whatever. But you're seeing it overseas every day. We're seeing it probably the most at prisons in our backyards, all over the country. There's major prisons with big open rec yards, um, all over the place. I can't really name them right now, but just with we got radars. There's other sensors deployed, and there's like massive cartel-backed networks of hardened drones flying multiple drops a day. It's kind of wild, right? And a lot of people aren't even aware. They're just like jaw dropped when they hear the actual stories. And meanwhile, we're sitting here going, yeah, drones really haven't been used for anything nefarious yet. Hopefully, they never will be. They're cute. They're a nice toy. Well, let's focus on hardening fences from maybe rifles shooting through them at electric utilities. But you think that we're spending millions of dollars to harden to like make a fence rifle bulletproof? You don't think someone's just going to use a drone to do the same thing and right
Right.
over that? And then now they don't have to be in eye shot of your cameras and your gunshot detection and all this stuff. That's people are spending millions of dollars, electric utilities, on this, right? And so, like what we've seen at prisons, I've said this before on the podcast, but if you harden the fences, they'll take to the air, and that's what we've seen. We've literally seen that at prisons. You harden the fence from throwovers, and suddenly now there's drones,
Yep.
flying in every day. And so, there's a lot of critical infrastructure in our country is vulnerable, which is not great. But maybe these events, the World Cup, the Olympics, maybe this helps bring the funding, from the administration, from different cities and states that are funding this. Um, and we still have till next summer to do the training, to get hands on, to say, hey, all these folks are already using these radars and TAC and other things. Try what's already working. They already have so many of these systems deployed. Link into the systems they already have. Hopefully, the work that all of us have been doing over the last few years will help. Will have helped to lay the groundwork for good quality, systems, good quality communications, interoperability, all that stuff. So, I guess, a little bit on a soapbox there, but just, I'm hopeful for the
No,
future for sure.
this content and others like this, we're the ones talking about this. Nobody else is talking about this. Oh, okay, we need a drone. Let's just go buy a drone and we'll figure out somebody to fly it. But you, me, and quite a few people in this audience have been involved in this and watched it progress over several years. And it is progressing, and I think it is going the right way with the right people. But as we have these daily or weekly conferences and understand we are still on the cutting edge of leading technology.
Absolutely. And to your earlier point, not all bleeding technology is good technology or has been vetted. And so, not only on the edge of bleeding technology, but also on the forefront of feet on the ground, hands on, real world deployments of good quality cutting edge technology. That's a big difference. Big
Yep.
difference, right? And a value that us and our circles and our friends, can bring, as people are suddenly tasked with, you need to protect Boston from, if they still have the World Cup. I don't know how all that's going to play out, but like we're going to protect Philadelphia. We're whoever is assigned to, you need to protect us from drones. This World Cup coming. What are they going to do? They need voices and resources to turn to. So anyway, folks out there, thanks for listening, and feel free to reach out, especially as this conversation continues to unfold over the coming weeks and months. We need every voice, right? And we need all the kind of ideas, and we need to work together on this. Any final thoughts, Andrew? Just in kind of in summary of what we've talked about.
No, I just think that we're all on the same page. We're going to watch this industry move forward. It obviously came from the military, and I got to watch them struggle with their drones overseas. I mean, give me a break if you didn't know about all those weird drone situations with the big boys. So we all have a lot to learn. We're all on the same page, and I think the collaboration and working together is all we can do.
Amen to that. All right. Well, thanks everybody, and we'll see you again next week, same time, same place. Here on This Week in Drones.
Thank you.
Talk soon.